Hello and welcome to Oakville Matters. This is the program, thanks to your TV, where you can connect with me and your members of council and other members of the public on what really matters to Oakville. Today, what seems to matter most to Oakville, to judge by my emails, is whether or not people have to wear masks. Joining me today to discuss this issue are Councillors Tom Adams and Cathy Duddeck, who
Hi, Rob, how are you?
And these two are the sponsors of the resolution that council passed asking the region to adopt a mandatory mask or face covering wearing bylaw. And the region will be taking that up on Wednesday morning, and we're taping on Tuesday afternoon. So there's going to be a little bit of a temporal shift here in terms of what we're talking about. Isn't that right, Cathy and Tom?
We can only hope it'll be in the shift with the way we want it.
That's right.
Now, I can tell you that my emails, when I take out the duplicates and and count them up carefully, are running about, let me think, 4 to 1
Right.
in favor of masks. And I gather that other members of council reported at our local council meeting that their mails were running like 9 to 1. So the indications are that most people want masks. We've been offered evidence, let's call it, from the World Health Organization that cuts both ways. Links to old statements by the WHO saying they're hardly effective at all, and what you really need to do is wash your hands and keep your distance and hide your sneezes and coughs. And then there's a newer report there that says, oh, well, maybe they can help. And we have noticed that all the public health officials over the last, 4 months, have said all along that this is a new virus and evidence will be coming in as we go, and knowledge and opinion, medical opinion, will evolve, which is a fancy way of saying it's going to change. They did warn us. So, Councillor Adams, you and I have chatted a couple of times about how frustrating it is that the advice changes over time.
Oh, yes. This is a very fluid situation for sure. And you're speaking about the WHO, and my information is that their most recent guidance, international guidance on the use of masks is that they're in fact recommending or encouraging the use of non-medical masks by the general public in situations where you can't otherwise separate yourself. And so that's consistent with the information that our medical officer of health is giving out, which is to say, make sure you're washing your hands, make sure that you physically distance, make sure if you stay home if you're sick. But where those kinds of things are not possible, if you're in an indoor setting especially, the use of a non-medical face mask can help prevent the transmission of the virus.
Well, I know that down south across the southern part of the United States, where they've got like a dumpster fire of COVID going on, the governors, I think in a sense of desperation, like they got no moves left, are ordering mask wearing in order to try to put off having to order everybody to stay home.
Yeah.
But really,
and the use of masks is a small part of the entire issue. It's definitely not the killer thing that will take out the virus and save us all from the pandemic, but it is a piece of the puzzle, and so it's part of a comprehensive approach that a municipality or province or state in the United States can take to help deal with the issue. And it is something that individuals can take ownership of themselves.
Cathy, were you worried on behalf of businesses having a big setback if the virus spread like it did in the States, and having to close down when they almost died, and is that part of what led you to want to have a mask order?
Very much so, because as Tom just pointed out, I mean, wearing a mask is just one tool in the toolkit that we have available in addition to the distancing and the washing of hands. But several people asked me, well, so why didn't you go after this mask bylaw at the onset? Well, in fairness, I think it's even more important now as people are becoming very, what shall I say, frustrated and tired with trying to adhere to ruling. And I mentioned this the other night when we were at council, that where people used to be very respectful of each other's safe space, so to speak, they now have no problem reaching over someone and saying, oh, it's only just one item. And so to prevent us having to go back to that strict close down, it's more important that we provide them as much of a tool to enable us to get to the next phase. So I think we have to be very, very mindful of the fact that we can't just rely on not going out. We have to do what is, you know, safe in order to be able to get out, to go to some of the businesses. And some of the businesses have gone to exceptional lengths, shall I say, to provide, you know, directional arrows in their shopping aisles, sanitation of their carts. They have the gel at the front door. Some have it even at the checkout. So, I mean, it's incumbent on us to do what we can to not only protect ourselves, but those frontline workers who have stayed working all this time to enable us to get our groceries and get some of the necessities, whether it's a pharmacy or something of that nature.
I do get very, I don't know how to describe it. I get emails from people who are frontline workers in stores telling me, you know, I don't make very much money. I'm risking my life. I sure wish people would respect my health. And, you know, it's hard to, those are hard to read and not try to help.
I agree.
You know, and then, but I understand, I feel the frustration that others have about needing such a measure when we have been so good and we've done such a great job. It's been a couple of weeks since we had an Oakville case in the Oakville hospital. We now have, and we were like a week with no cases whatsoever. I get a report every day, and it probably didn't show on the green screen there, but what today's report tells me is that OTMH now has a one COVID case, but it's not from Oakville. It's from out of our area, because you know other areas are worse than us. Other areas were far more flagrant in the number of people who or had larger numbers of people who flagrantly disregarded the guidance about staying home if you're ill, washing your hands every time you touch something that might be infected, keeping your distance, and so on.
So that's an interesting thing that you've talked about there, Rob, and we should think about where we are with respect to the curve. And we have in Halton and in Oakville specifically crushed the curve, flattened that curve. Our caseloads right now in Halton are actually quite similar to where they were when we all started this mid-March. And so if you consider where we went up that curve in April, and that's the point where we shut down in Ontario all the businesses, we're now opening those businesses, but our case and infection rates are still the same as they were when we started the whole affair. And so if we are going to go back to having all of our economy open, which we would like to be able to do, we need to think about, okay, we're not going to shut down the businesses. What are we going to do instead in order to make sure that we don't have the giant infection rates that you see south of the border? And now I understand that as of today, the border is going to be closed for a longer period of time again. And so, you know, we're not hopefully going to have a whole bunch of cases coming north from the US, but one day the US border is going to get opened up again, and we better be ready for it.
So So, you know, speaking of opening, much of the province went to stage 3, or is going to stage 3 this Friday. It was announced on Monday. So, and if we go by what happened with stage 2, where Halton did not go to stage 3 in the announcement, which is the same thing going to happen to us for stage 2. And then it was about a week later that we got allowed to go into stage 2. So we can tell from reading the ice that it's a week or so away from us going to stage 3. And I suppose it's heartening to me, I have to say, that the opening up under stage 2 did not produce a big spike in cases here. And it's been long enough to have seen them come up because of, you know, the incubation time that there is on this virus of 7 to 14 days. So
And the province is saying that they want to see 4 weeks from the time you go from one stage to the next. And because we were a week later on going to stage 2, we're a week later with respect to moving to stage 3. If you look at our neighbors, Peel continues to have a slightly higher infection rate than we do here in Halton. But the last time I looked, we were actually a little bit higher than Hamilton. And so in terms of where we are with respect to the other regions, we're better than some, but not as good as others. And so we need to continue to be vigilant.
well, I know that Ottawa went through to stage 3 or is going through to stage 3, and our numbers are way better than Ottawa. So so it does feel like the last time. And based on what you said, could we anticipate that in a week we'll go through, because of this 4-week calculation, and that Peel and Toronto would wait yet another week?
That's correct.
That is quite possibly an outcome that we might be seeing. But we'll have to wait and see. And we'll have to wait and see just how well Peel continues to do under their current framework. And they have, by the way, already moved forward with a mandatory mask requirement, as Toronto is.
The other thing we have to be mindful of in this discussion is the fact that for all intents and purposes, the professionals, doctors, physicians are all saying, brace yourself for a second wave, and compounded with that, the normal cycle of flu-like viruses that go on come fall. And so it's almost like waiting for the other boot to drop. We're waiting to see and preparing as best we can in the eventuality that does come again, that we're not caught unawares like we were the first time, having to ramp everything up.
I'm hopeful that we'll keep in mind that we started on this path telling people we had to crush the curve as part of a race against time to increase healthcare capacity. And in Halton, we went to work with a very strong will and huge cooperation and crushed the curve. And in Halton, we increased our hospital beds who could care for COVID by 200 or 300. Add up the extra beds built in Milton, Oakville, and Burlington. So I was assuming that cases could rise and it wouldn't be a disaster because we'd have places to care for people. Whereas in Milan and New York and in Houston now, what they've got is an exhaustion of their capacity.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to test our capacity. I mean, I don't think any of us want to be in a place where we go, oh, good, we bumped up to 99% capacity. We're still good.
Well, I don't want to go to 99% capacity. And I was going to say the footnote about Houston is Houston's a medical city, and for them to exhaust their capacity is going some, because they have huge capacity in Houston. So yeah, but it is going to be hard for people who were told for 4 months we're doing this in the name of creating more capacity. I do worry that that the WHO says it can't be eradicated now. It's too widespread.
I would tend to agree with that assessment. And while there is some hopeful news in the world of vaccine production, we're not there yet, and we're months away from tests being completed and stuff like that. So we're without a vaccine for the fall, and we better be ready to deal with it.
Never mind a vaccine. We don't even have the infrastructure to deliver it. The ampules, the capacity, the sheer logistical capacity.
That's right. So forget about actually having a vaccine at all. We don't yet have the ability to produce and deliver enough across the globe.
So let's talk about stage 3 briefly, just so people have an idea of what it means. A whole bunch of things stay closed in stage 3. Do one of you have the list? Who wants to be the one to announce the things that stay closed.
all the things that get to happen and don't get to happen. Well, things like giant amusement parks and water parks get to stay closed. So I guess no Canada's Wonderland for the foreseeable future.
Buffet-style food services don't open.
That's right. So no giant buffets. You don't get to go dancing in the bars and the restaurants. You don't get to go to karaoke.
No overnight camps.
The kids don't get to go to overnight camps. So no overnight, horse camps and stuff like that.
Now here's one that I've never actually experienced. So I don't know if I'm going to be missing anything, but no private karaoke.
Yes, fortunately, there's no karaoke allowed. That's you're all saved from my karaoke abilities.
Now,
But
one of the really interesting things about stage 3 is the way they word it is no prolonged or deliberate contact while playing sports. So you were both big athletes as youths. I won't say anything about whether you're still athletic or not, but decode that for people. What sports could that mean?
Well, I guess if you're playing rugby, you can't, get into the scrum there. And I guess if you're, playing football, same kind of thing. So there's a bunch of sports where, you can't do wrestling, that kind of thing.
What about basketball? I used to play defense, and you can't be close to the person who's trying to carry the ball so that you're preventing sort of body contact. Granted, you called for a foul, but still, it goes on.
So the basis of all of
basketball.
this is each sports organization has a parent association, and each of the associations is providing guidance to the local clubs as to what's appropriate for their sport and how they can or cannot continue during each of the phases or each of the stages.
So just to continue running through the list, no saunas, no steam rooms, no bathhouses, and here's one I won't miss because I've never been to one, no oxygen bars. I hesitate to ask, what is an oxygen bar?
Okay,
Well,
I know what it is, but it's interesting you raised that because there was an excellent posting. I don't know if either of you saw it on social media, and it was an ER nurse, and she had a mask on, and she was pointing to the monitor and basically saying she had just finished a 10-hour shift, and she did her saturation reading for oxygen, and she was 99%. And
Wow.
yeah, and she was saying, so my mask is even more cumbersome than the one you would wear when you're out in the community. And so this sort of urban legend about the fact I'll have no oxygen if I have a mask on sort of flew out the window.
So now Rob, we've talked about what's not allowed under stage 3. Let's talk about what will be allowed in stage 3. And one of the things that's happening in stage 3 is the indoor gathering limits are increasing from 10 up to 50. And so it means that there will be larger indoor gatherings going on, and the outdoor gathering limit is increasing to a maximum of 100 people. And
But
so
you still have to keep your distance, right?
that's right. So even though these gathering limits are increasing, they're still subject to the physical distancing requirements. So that 2-meter distance from other people that are outside of your social circle needs to continue.
And I think that's something the majority of people think it's either or, and they don't realize, as you point out, Tom, that you still have to do that social distancing. They think, oh, you've got to get out a free jail card.
That's right. And the concept of the social circle is still being advocated and is still being used
versus your bubble.
And so don't burst your social circle bubble. So choose your 10 people carefully, your 10 friends and family members carefully, so to speak.
So it stays, so the 10 limit stays?
That 10-person social circle limit stays, which is a group of people that could easily include all of your immediate family members, and it could easily include, for example, your parents or the grandparents of a family kind of thing, or the grandchildren of a family. And so it does allow for families to continue with their tight-knit family kind of environment, or close-knit friend group kind of thing, depending on the nature of your get-togethers. But that still means that we need to continue to consider who and how we get together with. And so that stage 3 is not a complete removal of that guidance.
Correct.
So now we're about to open up the libraries to people to come in and use the personal computers in order to get on the internet. And what other impacts on the library do you think stage 3 will have? Cathy, Tom?
I'm thinking of things like some parents I've spoken to are a little leery of something like signing out a DVD or signing out something where they don't know whether something's been sterilized or it's being transmitted to something. And I keep trying to reassure them that we have done this with taking all those various steps involved, that similar to what you would do for a business, wiping something down like a keypad when somebody uses either their Visa or Interact. And that's the other one that's very interesting, is the amount of people who now say no cash wanted. My parents would have just rolled over if they'd said no cash wanted.
Okay, so yeah, no, you're right. So we also have to reimagine a lot of our municipal services because of these contact concepts. And I'm noticing a lot of things going on around how we travel together. The airlines are arguing that they shouldn't have to keep an empty seat between the passengers. And there's some issues in terms of how people are going to sit in the subway and the GO trains and the GO buses, and for that matter, our buses. And you know, transit was expensive enough when we were allowed to fill every seat, and we do have a couple of bus routes where that's actually possible because there's so many riders. And we got a lot of other bus routes where there's no danger of filling the bus, but that's going to have a pretty big impact on our budget.
And the other aspect too is the fact that people forget that there's several people who are now saying, professionals, there's a concern that it's airborne, meaning that something may linger in a room longer than when somebody leaves the room and then comes back into it. So that's another variable that we're going to have to be dealing with in the days ahead, once the data is available, to say whether or not, in fact, it is airborne. So you'd be concerned about something like a restaurant or a library or somewhere where people will congregate and maybe leave some remnant if they're COVID positive.
Well, let's turn back to the mandatory mask question for just a quick second.
Yeah.
You know, the one that started it all was the one in Toronto, and in Toronto they had a whole bunch of exceptions, which, as I read them, looked to me like exceptions that were probably dictated by legal advice about what the Charter of Rights and Freedoms prevents a government from doing. There's a certain amount of, you know, not with my body you don't kind of.
Right.
Thank you, Ron, for bringing this up, because this is probably the #1 question that gets brought up by people who are concerned about the concept of having a mandatory mask requirement. And the exemptions are very broad. They include young children, and so there are different versions of bylaws out there that either completely exempt kids under 2 or kids under 5. There are also broad exemptions around anybody who has any medical reason or a religious reason or religious or cultural reason. And in all the bylaws that are being drafted, there are basically requirements that nobody should be asked why they aren't wearing a mask. So if you are not wearing a mask for any reason, you ought not to be told that you have to prove why you're not wearing a mask. So particularly those who have medical reasons, those are exempt, and you can't be denied entry or service because you're exempt.
So now, where I brought it up because of where I want to go with that is, there's going to be a mandatory mask bylaw in Oakville it's pretty clear because council voted that there will be one. And the point is that there will still be people who will not have to wear a mask. And what that means is, I mean, I'm in a higher risk category for getting, for not enjoying COVID if I catch it. And that means that I have a responsibility to myself to avoid people who, if I'm worried about catching it from people and I see somebody not wearing a mask, I need to avoid them. You know, like the ship has sailed. You know, when you run into somebody, you know, my personal responsibility kicks in. And, you know, like when I go to a grocery store where they don't require a mask right now, but they do require distance, and they have next to no customers early in the morning. And in my neighborhood, nobody gets up early to go grocery shopping. So I do. And what I'm trying to say here is we still have some choice in life about whether we expose ourselves and to the virus. And I think that it's important to remember that you can't put everything on other people. There's your personal role in your life you do have to keep a hold of. In the and those bylaws, because of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, are going to continue to be that way. In the 1 minute that we have left, would either of you like to change my my statement on that? Or
absolutely not, Rob. But what we have seen in places that have brought in mandatory mask bylaws is that the percentage of people using masks has gone up dramatically. And that's really what this is about. It's not getting 100% of people to wear masks, but it's hopefully going to have 80 or maybe 90% of people wearing masks.
So you would call this a form of strong signaling?
That is, we're making this socially normal and getting people to get used to the idea of using a mask. Yeah.
Well, it might be, who knows, it might be useful in the fall when the influenza season comes. I've never been so healthy in my life with all my hand washing and avoiding. So there's a lot to be recommended for these steps.
Wash your hands.
And I'll close on this signal. Email mayor@oakville.ca if there's a topic or a concern that you would like addressed here on Oakville Matters. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.